Welcome to Mining the Mysteries, a catechetical podcast that explores the depths of our Orthodox and Catholic faith in the English tradition. I'm Matthew Stewart, Digital Media Director for the Anglican Province of America, along with your hosts, Father Wade Miller and Father Randall Russell from St. Philip's Anglican Church in Blacksburg, Virginia. We're glad to have you with us as we dig deeper into the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints. Welcome back, folks. Today we are going to discuss the fifth commandment, and this will be part one of a two-part series. We're going to discuss the subject of honoring thy father and thy mother. Father Miller?
Thank you, Stu. Last time we looked at commandments 1 through 4 and talked about the vertical aspect of the law, the Ten Commandments, which has to do with our relationship to God. And now we are transitioning into the second table of the law, the horizontal aspect of the commandments, which has to do with our relationship with our neighbor. So now we begin to focus again on relationships with others. We talked about going back to Matthew 22. The two great commandments is love God, love your neighbor. And so now we're transitioning into loving our neighbor who is made in the image of God. And so we'll spend the next several episodes exploring the ways in which we behave, obey, and serve our neighbors. And so the first one that we talk about, and it begins with honoring our father and our mother. And we read on page 288 in the 1928 Book of Common Prayer, in the Offices of Instruction, the question, what is your duty towards your neighbor? And the answer is, my duty towards my neighbor is to love him as myself and to do to all men as I would they should do unto me. That's not a typo. That's actually the way it reads. So anyways, as we talk about that, the point is that loving our neighbor begins at home, literally, in the domestic church. But it applies not only to our parents and has application to all who are over us, which we will read about in a bit in the Offices of Instruction. And we'll get into this in the next episode as we talk about other authorities and our relationship to them. But in this episode, we will focus on our relationship with our parents. So let's read the commandment, which is found on page 579 in the 1928 Book of Common Prayer. So would one of you want to read the fifth commandment?
Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee.
So honor thy father and thy mother. This is a quote from, of course, the Ten Commandments, which you can look at Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. But all of this really harkens back to the first two chapters in Genesis, as we talk about what a family is supposed to be. Not what it always is, but what the ideal family is supposed to be. And so here in Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 28, Stu, would you read that for us?
Sure. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. The image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth.
So yeah, when we think about the fact that honoring thy father and thy mother begins in the home, and here we have really what a home is. And how does Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 28 really lay out what a family is supposed to be?
Well, this verse is often used as a reference to the Trinity. Many of the church fathers saw it this way. God refers to himself in the plural, let us make man in our image. We've talked about this before but even within the Trinity, there is a hierarchy. And I would say that man, who is created in the image of God, the two shall be one flesh. They have the same role here, and that is to have dominion over the earth. But there is a hierarchy, even in the family, as I'm sure we'll discuss.
Yeah. That language, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Idea of fruitful and multiply. There are some that take a very hard literalist view of that to say that one of the things is to, have as many children as you can to fill the earth. And in that particular context, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm not going against that, but I'm saying I think that also within the creation mandate, we have to understand that in light of the Great Commission, where Jesus says, go into all the world and make disciples. But here, the idea is be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea. And that goes back to what you're talking about, Father Randall, about order.
Yes.
Which is so important when we talk about this idea of honoring thy father and mother. It's with the understanding that God has set our parents over us for a reason. And our obedience to them is part of this order, which we'll get into here in a minute. Stu, would you read Genesis chapter 2, verses 23 and 24, as we talk about specifically man and woman coming together as one?
And Adam said, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh.
So here you have this language of one flesh, which is what we talk about in terms of marriage, or the marriage covenant, or the sacrament of marriage. The creation of Adam and Eve. Eve is taken from man. She is bone of his bones, flesh of his flesh, and she's called woman, which we've talked about before, which means what?
Woman?
Yeah.
That's her name.
Yeah.
It means woman.
Yeah.
Helper.
Mother of the living. Yeah.
Well, it is interesting. I think we have some examples here. Adam being an example of not the greatest husband in the beginning, and then after the fall of him really kind of stepping up. Because right now at this point in time, her name is not Eve, it is woman. Just like Adam's name means humanity. Yeah, that is her name. That's not a put down. That's just her name. Her name is woman. But then after the fall, we have Adam giving her a new name, Eve, the mother of all the living.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we think of Paul's language of marriage, what is Adam doing here? He is presenting his bride as spotless and clean, because they could have for the rest of their lives blamed one another, right? He could have been like, hey, you should never give me that to eat, but he doesn't. He calls her Eve, the mother of all the living. So he forgives and that. But before that, you actually have Adam failing in his responsibilities, because when Eve eats the fruit, if you read it in its context, where's the man in all of this? Where's Adam? He's right there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a reversal of roles. He's silent. He's just as wants to see where this goes, but he kind of lets Eve take charge. And then when loving husband, that's sarcastic, then when he sees that she doesn't fall over dead, he's like, all right, give me some.
Yeah. No, I think that's very important, because a lot of times even, when we hear the stories, it's like Adam's off like picking fruit or something.
No.
And yeah, but no, he's there present. And that's also a good distinction, which I was wrong in the fact that woman means woman, and it's not until Eve, he gives her that name.
Yes.
She becomes mother of the living. Good. See, I'm still learning too.
You have a new wrinkle on your brain.
That's right.
Well, it's all this idea when you're given a new name, which the relationship between like baptism and christening, we talked a little bit about that, but it's a new start.
Yeah.
It's a fresh beginning. So right after the fall, Adam says, your name will be Eve, mother of all living. It's like we were given a promise here in Genesis 3:15, the first gospel. Let's move forward in this and let the past be the past. And I think that's very important for a marriage as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Very, pastoral point too. Yeah. So this idea that a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. So what you have is this idea that out of the offspring, being fruitful and multiply as children enter into the picture, then they grow up, and then they are, especially in the context of marriage, they become one flesh with their spouse. And this continues in this kind of perpetual cycle, if you will. But the point is that leaving father and mother does not mean abandoning, and we'll get into some of that practical points later. It does not mean you abandon your parents, but there is a new relationship within that. So everything is great. Everyone lives happily ever after. No problems. All is well in paradise. Well, as Father already mentioned, by the time you get to Genesis chapter 3, this whole thing starts breaking down. And sadly, we see the breakdown of the family as sin enters into the picture in Genesis chapter 3, with wife and husband blaming one another, and especially more the husband blaming the wife's blaming the serpent. The serpent made me do it, the husband saying, my wife made me do it. And this breakdown continues in chapter 4, where then the offspring of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Cain then kills his brother Abel. So instead of living in domestic paradise, it's almost like a bad soap opera, right?
Yeah.
And I think we need to say families, although we all kind of have an idealized concept of family, sin does create problems. Not all is peachy. Not all is like leave it to Beaver,
When sin enters the picture, we've been talking about order. All sin does is disrupt that order. And what I find fascinating about Genesis is in the beginning, woman is to be a helper to man. That's not, by the way, downplaying her role at all. Let's not forget that the Holy Spirit himself is called a helper. Again, there's a hierarchy in the Trinity, and there's a hierarchy in the family as well. And so she used to be a helper, but then after the fall, when sin enters into the picture, that's where things get messy. Before, this order was fantastic. Everyone was doing what they were supposed to be, and it was a well-oiled machine, the family. But when sin enters the picture, everything kind of falls apart.
Yeah.
And I know we're going to talk about disobedience to parents, but it's the same thing. Children should be obedient to their parents. Sin enters the picture. Children then disobey their parents and try to, and can that be abused? Absolutely. But that's the problem with sin.
Yeah.
Is that we abuse everything. We abuse our freedom in Christ. We abuse the order that God has given us.
Yeah. Sin brings disorder. And we won't get into all this, but in Genesis, God creates from the chaos, and then the chaos is always luring, and it's always kind of pulling us back. And behind that is the master of chaos, which is Satan.
Well, even in the book of, I know you said don't get into this, but in the book of Jeremiah, he talks about how a sinful world is like the world before creation. It's just a chaotic world. So again, we need to order our lives according to God and not be prideful, but submit to the authorities that we have.
Yeah. And we're all called to that submission. It's not as though, anyone's left out of that. Yeah. And kind of where we're going with this, talking about disobedience, it's pretty explicit in 2 Timothy chapter 3. And I'm going to ask Stu if he'd read the first 4 verses of 2 Timothy chapter 3.
But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God.
Yeah, so pretty explicit there. I mean, there's a whole litany of vices, and one of those is disobedient to parents. And when we talk about in the last days, That's not something where we get our theology from the news and we base this concept of the last days on what's happening in America or what's happening over in Ukraine and Russia or China or wherever. The last days really refers to after those days after the ascension of Jesus. And
it's the new covenant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. The old covenant has passed away, the new has come.
Yeah. And even though we're not in Advent when this is airing yet, but that's the whole concept of Advent. Christ came, and yet we live in this time where we look forward to his reappearance or his glorious coming. Yeah.
I think in that verse too, if you look, I think there's a reason why Paul puts men will be lovers of themselves first before everything else, because this is the issue. Whenever we talk about order or whenever we talk about hierarchy, it's almost like, well, what about me? And there's this pride that enters in. There's this, as Americans, we are obsessed with our rights, but freedom in God is his order.
Yeah.
Not necessarily our right to do whatever we want. And this is where we see things failing, I believe, because men will be lovers of themselves. And then if they're lovers of themselves, why do they love money? Because of all the things that they think it can get them. Boasters, proud, and disobedient to parents is there because why? The children love themselves above everything else, and they put themselves first.
Yeah, that's a good point. In the Philokalia, which is a collection of works from early, mainly monastics, you see this theme throughout all the writings, and that is self-love is not, despite what our culture says, is not seen as virtue. It is seen as the opposite of that. It is vice, putting ourselves or propping ourselves up, girl power, or this idea that men need to, flaunt their masculinity and all that stuff. That is not Christian.
Right.
And that breeds this idea of, I'm not accountable to anyone, especially to my parents, And I think we see this I'm not getting political here, but it's just a fact that what we've done is we've now pretty much let the schools raise our kids. And so the values of secularism, modernism, and all of that is now coming to roost, especially in our culture. We're seeing the breakdown of the family, and I think that a lot of this is by design. I won't get into all that, but I think a lot of it is by design because the idea is that these children need to be free thinkers and they should not be under any kind of tradition which they seen as oppressive. And I think that it's even in methodologically our education where so much now is about self-expression instead of learning.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's about destabilization.
Yeah.
Because when you create chaos without any kind of hierarchy or order, then ultimately someone's going to be in charge.
Yeah.
And it's going to be much easier to step in when things are in chaos to give some sort of reprieve.
Yeah.
And say, oh, okay, well, I'll take control. And that's not the kind of control that you want.
Yeah.
Well, that's what Satan does in the very beginning, right?
Right.
With the tree and everything, you have this good order, and then Satan steps in and notice how the order is then reversed. You have the lowest beast of the field, this creeping thing, this serpent is on top. Then you have woman, then you have man. And both woman or man are almost devalued to the point where they're animals. And it's all with this promise, you will be like God.
Right.
But it's not, someone's in charge of that, and someone's trying to replace God's order with their order, and they're being on top.
It's a bait and switch.
It is.
It's a trick.
Yeah.
It's a trick under the guise of, oh, you have total autonomy over yourself and you don't have to answer to anyone.
Yeah.
But it's a trick.
Yeah. And not to belabor this point too much, but I just want to say it. My best professor was a guy that soon as you walked in there and right on the dot, if class started at 8, he was lecturing. And then we had to read and we had to write our exams, do blue books and all that stuff. He was so hard. He was nicknamed the Bear, and he was hard. But I got so much more out of that than I did other classes where they had us breaking up into groups, doing group think and group speak, and it's basically experiential learning. Well, in the former model, you have an expert who is imparting the information, but also teaching us to think too, because he would ask us questions, everything, but it was intellectually rigorous. In the other model, there are no right and wrong answers. The group just is sharing. And that kind of education, I'm sorry if this offends anybody, but that's been terrible. It's just not the way education's supposed to be. And it goes back to what Father Randall said just earlier. There is a sense of this order, and the submission is me as a student. I do not have the answers. If I did, I wouldn't be in the class. I'm there to learn from the professor and, to be challenged and to think about things and critically. But you have to have information and you have to have actual content before you have any thought of how this works.
And you have to be able to produce.
Yeah.
And that's you called them blue books. In seminary, we do notebooks. You have to produce something based on what you're learning, and then you realize you have these tools to move forward, and you can use those tools for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
I think you see that in just about everything, every aspect of life today, though. When I was teaching the public schools, I can't tell you how many times it was emphasized that the teacher is to be almost more of a student themselves. And I'm not saying, I'm not getting on my high horse and saying that teachers don't learn anything from students, not saying that at all, but that the teacher was more to be like a quiet guide to let the student flourish and be independent and not be so rigid and structural. And I think you see that in everything. Leaders, we look at leaders and who's the guy who's going to win, whoever can best paint themselves as the common man, not as someone who's able to get the job done. There's this shift. If you look at even scripturally, or if you look at like ancient mythology, the hero is always a king, the guy who's on top of his game. Not that he doesn't have struggles and shortcomings, but it's always kind of like we want someone who's competent in that role. Well, now it's shift. I want the everyman. I want, someone who's just like me. And it's just interesting that that's where we go. And I think you see it everywhere. I think you even sometimes see it, I dare say, in Bible class, right? Because there's two ways you can teach a Bible study. You can have someone who's actually has information to share, and not that you don't get interaction with that, or it can be just like, let's sit in a circle and powwow and share our feelings.
Yeah. What does this verse mean to me?
Yes.
Yeah. No, you're right. And I picked on education there for a minute because I see this as one of the main facilitators for this, disobedience to parents, kind of looking at, your parents are from another generation where they actually believed in certain dogmas and certain, objective facts or reality. But you're right. It's not just education. We see this in politics. We see this in the church. We see this in education, of course. We see this across the board. And I think it's something that we need to be able to be discerning and recognize and say, yeah. And if we were just pragmatists, which we're not, but if we were just pragmatists, just look at what this has created academically. I'm going back to education. We're now like below Vietnam in our standards.
Yeah.
So
and that flows into everything.
Yeah.
Look at businesses now. Businesses have a hard time finding labor.
Yeah.
Businesses are falling apart just because people get jobs and they think they don't have to answer to their superiors.
Yeah. And it's what Father Randall very keenly talked about here in this text in 2 Timothy 3. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud. It's this sense of entitlement that, I don't owe anybody anything, but everybody owes me everything, And I think that mentality is something that is not over-exaggerated. This is not barbershop gossip. This is pretty, I think, basic understanding of what's happening culturally.
When sin enters the picture, you no longer have that via media. You no longer have the middle ground. I think with this episode, what we're focusing on is the pendulum swinging too far one way. And the next episode, we'll probably talk about the pendulum swinging too far the other way. But the pendulum needs to be actually right in the middle to have that right balance. But the pendulum, in this context, the pendulum swings and it's like all the abuses of the past are pointed out, and therefore that system is broken. The pendulum swinging the other way is like, well, all the abuses of what we're talking about now are pointed out, where we have to hand over complete power and authority to the government, and they take care of everything. That's not the answer either. It's that middle way. But it just occurs to me that we're really talking about two extremes, and on this episode we're going to talk about the one extreme where we're all it's not even equality. It's just, I am on top.
Yeah. Everybody look at me. The world revolves around me. And well, speaking of extremes, now we're going to talk about two verses from Exodus that talks about the way that parenting happened in the ancient world in Israelite society. And so, Stu, you get to read these two verses, Exodus chapter 21, verses 15 and 17.
Okay, here are a couple lighthearted verses for you. And he who strikes his father or his mother shall surely be put to death, and he who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death.
We're not saying we want a form of Sharia law or anything like that.
Right, yeah.
But, go ahead.
That's not what we're going for. But I that verse, in light of the commandment, I think it makes sense, because the commandment has a promise attached to it that you shall live long upon the earth.
Yeah.
I'm being serious, because if you disobey your parents, guess what? Yeah. You're not living long on the earth according to this. Now, we focus on the letter of the law here now, and I would say it's more the spirit of the law. But it is, if you have children constantly disobedient to their parents, you have the breakdown of society. You have a culture that can no longer function.
Yeah.
With the commandments, the two tables of the law, the first table being focused on our relationship with God, the second table being focused with our relationship with our neighbor, it begins with the highest authority over us on planet Earth, and that is our parents. Mm-hmm. And if we abuse that authority, how can we respect any other authority?
Yeah, and I think that's the point. It begins in the home. Respect must begin in the home. And they didn't need Bill Gates back then, because even though they were fruitful and multiplied, for all those that cursed their parents, that was the population control of the ancient world. So,
it is getting to the point. It is true. The family unit is the backbone of society. And if you attack that, which the devil is very, wise in this, if you attack that, all of society is going to crumble as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think we talked enough about rebellion and disrespect towards parents. Let's look at another example.
Oh, this is a fun one.
Yeah, this is a really fun one. This is the sin of Eli and his sons. And if you want to read this on your own, you can go to 1 Samuel chapter 2, chapter 3, and then it goes into 4. But I'm going to have Stu, if he would, to read 1 Samuel chapter 2, verses 22 through 24.
Now Eli was very old, and he heard everything his sons did to all Israel, and how they lay with women who assembled at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. So he said to them, "Why do you do such things? For I hear of your evil dealings from all the people. No, my sons, for it is not a good report that I hear. You make the Lord's people transgress."
So a little background to this. Eli, what was his vocation?
He was a priest.
He was a priest. And back in that day, if you were a priest, it meant your sons would be a priest.
Right. You're of the tribe of Levi. Your sons are going to follow in your footsteps.
So we find out that his two sons, Hophni, did I say that right?
Hophni, yeah.
Hophni and Phinehas, sons of Eli, they were wicked, and we didn't even get into all this. You can read this for yourself in chapter 2, but there was a certain way they were supposed to handle the sacrifice, especially the meat, and they were taking the choice filet mignon from the meat, and they were desecrating the sacrifice. And then here we read that they were also sleeping with women who came to the temple. Not good guys. So anyways, Eli gets word of this. I don't know how he couldn't. And he says, "It's not good, my sons." Well, no duh. So we're going to read now from 1 Samuel chapter 3, verses 11 through 13.
Then the Lord said to Samuel, "Behold, I will do something in Israel at which both ears of every one who hears it will tingle. And that day I will perform against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house, from beginning to end. For I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knows, because his sons made themselves vile, and he did not restrain them."
So here you have judgment that's being pronounced, not just on the sons, but why would Eli be a part of this?
Because he didn't discipline his sons.
Exactly. Eli failed to really not just speak out against his sons, but to actually do something.
It's his duty.
Yeah. And this is the uncomfortable part that we're going to talk about, and that's parenting. So it's not only our children to obey their parents, but parents must correct their children. Eli failed to do this. And it's sad, but it's not just Eli. I mean, Samuel, the prophet who's mentioned here, same thing. So the idea is you got to get your own house in order for order to then spread out from your house to others, to the community. And Eli failed to do that. And then in 1 Samuel chapter 4, verses 11, and then again in verse 18, it records the death of the sons of Eli, and then Eli himself, who fell back in his chair and died. And they lived happily ever. But yeah, so again, as we talk about this, Eli failed as a father because he failed to keep order in his house, which led to a desecration of the house of the Lord. And so when we talk about this is a big issue, but it's something that's so relevant, and that is the problem today with many parents, not all, but with many parents, they want to be friends with their children.
Equals.
They want to be equals. And that hierarchy is taken away. Therefore, the order's taken away, the structure's taken away, and chaos then starts coming in.
And it's not just chaos to the home. I mean, in this case, it's chaos to the people of God.
Yeah.
If this is not addressed, this is not just going to remain an issue between Eli and his sons. This is going to spread.
Yeah. And that's exactly the point. And it does spread. And today, I know I'm going to sound like an old curmudgeon, but we see this all around us, meaning in our culture and society, especially in American culture, where, even to talk about correcting your children is seen as some kind of abuse. And we're not talking about beating your kids. That's not what we're talking about.
Again, going to the abuses of that other swing of the pendulum. That's not what we're focusing on.
No. But we are saying that we have a job to do as parents, and it's not an easy job, but it is the most important job that we can do. Now, Matthew chapter 10 speaks of family animosity. Jesus talks about how there's going to be animosity because of the gospel, because of him, but there will be animosity. And the point is that we are not to go around seeking the approval of our kids by going against what God has approved in terms of the home. And it's that simple. We are to worship, love God first, and then we are to take that love And that should be the motivation, because God is love, and lovingly help our kids who start to stray get back on the path.
Well, what does God himself do with us? The Lord chastises those he loves.
Yes.
Because if he doesn't, that disorder, it's going to get out of hand.
Yeah. And what kind of father would he be?
Right.
So, yeah. So let's go on. So we've looked at, number one, we looked at what family is supposed to be. Then we looked at family dysfunction, which we just read very, very explicitly here in 1 Samuel. Now let's talk about order in the home, the domestic church, and let's look at a passage that's very familiar, Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Stu, would you read that for us?
Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you, and you may live long on the earth. And you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord.
So, as we talk about this, again, the commandment's reiterated. It's the commandment with a promise.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is not only are children to obey their parents, but they're to honor. They are to honor, which is pretty high language, to esteem, to revere. Trish and I have talked about this. My wife is a nurse practitioner, and they have various cultures represented in some of the patients. And she talks about how in the Latino culture, in the Asian culture, there's a high reverence for their parents and their elders, and how beautiful it is to see. And so we are called to honor, to obey, to honor. And then there is this point here in verse 4, and sometimes we just read verses 1 through 3 and then call it a day, but it says, "And fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord." And so I would say this to fathers, to mothers as well, but especially to fathers. There's times where you have to ask your kids forgiveness, because part of it is, and I'm not saying go around all the time, doing that. That's weird. But I'm saying if you have really messed up. I remember one time I accused my second son of something and found out later he didn't do, and I punished him for it. And I had to go and say, Dad messed up here, and will you forgive me? And I'm so sorry, and that's part of it as well, because in this order, a king who is not self-reflective is a dictator, right? We're not called to be dictators. We're called to be loving husbands and fathers. And that means sometimes we have to own our sin as well. So
I think too with this verse, it's exactly what I was trying to say about the pendulum and going that middle way. That first section, children, obey your parents, honor your father and mother. Children are supposed to do this. If we are to look at one another, created in the image of God, and respect one another, your parents have an authority, bear an image that is to be respected, and especially fathers. That's the image of our Heavenly Father. You respect it as such. But then the other way is making it clear, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but also don't just be hands off. Bring them up in training and admonition of the Lord. So you have that balance, and that's what we are always supposed to seek, the balance. We don't want to make the abuses on one way where we just let our children run wild. We also don't want the abuses on the other way where, our children are afraid of us and terrified of us, because guess what? That's not supposed to be our relationship with God either. Mm-hmm. We should fear God, but that word fear is one of deep respect, and that's the relationship that children should have to their parents.
Yeah. One of the things we've talked about a lot in the past is this understanding of hope. I know when we had Father Peter Jocelyn on, he talked about that. Hope is not just mere wishful thinking. Hope is based upon a promise. And I will say this to parents. I'm one of these, by the way, even though this is not confession time, but to be fully transparent, especially my two oldest. I was too hard on them. I was so afraid of them being spoiled brats, and I went the other direction. And sometimes I can really beat myself up, even to this day, over that. And I think as parents, we also recognize that all of us are in process. We are all hopefully growing in Christ. And I have asked the forgiveness of my boys for that, but it's something that, I know a lot of parents live with regrets, and I think there's nothing you can do about what's happened in the past other than just trying to be better in the present and really mend those relationships for the future. And I think that is really important. So as we conclude here, there's a few things I thought we could kind of wrap up and practically talk about. We've already talked about this, but discussing order as it relates to our priestly and kingly duty as baptized Christians. And man, I think if there's one thing we could say about this podcast, we could probably change the name from Minding the Mysteries to Striving for Order, because that's the whole point. You said it very well, Father Randall. It begins locally. Everything begins. So it begins, first of all, with us, like individually, having order in our lives, and then, helping our children and helping form our homes in this order, which then goes into our parish. And we're going to talk about all this in the next episode. Then translates into our parish, then into our communities, and into other relationships. And that's our call, because we have been made priests and kings, according to 1 Peter. We've been made priests and kings as baptized Christians. And so we are to have dominion, not in lording it over anybody or acting like some tyrants. That's the opposite, but now as servants. Yeah.
I think you hit the nail on the head. That's how you strike the balance. Priest and kings. Kings is you have an authority, you have to bear it. You're in charge. Priests, what do priests do? They sacrifice. You have to make sacrifices for the good of your children. And that not only means going to work and working 9 to 5 and all of that. That's good. But also sacrifices in terms of, my children are not going to really be happy when I have to do this, but I have to sacrifice my ego and I have to sacrifice my pride and do it. And of course, the example we have here of this balance, it is Christ our Lord, who is both priest and king, who offers the sacrifices, but also bears the authority. In terms of like ancient myth, the view of the hero as someone who's competent or everything, we kind of go the other way and we want the everyman. Christ has both, right? Mm-hmm. And he has both perfectly balanced. He not only bears that authority, but what does he do? He is God with us, right? So he's not only the head honcho, but he's also the everyman at the same time.
And I liked what you said earlier. He's not the absentee God. We're not deists. He is involved.
Yes.
And so a good father is one that's involved. Not overly involved, because that could be weird, but involved, available, always wanting that relationship with our children. Yeah.
Prodigal son.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We're not to be distant, but like the prodigal son, we love our kids and we want what's best for them. And we're not going to just condone sin, but at the same time, we're going to rejoice with them, especially in their growth in Christ. So, the other thing, which is pretty much explicit throughout this podcast, but it just needs to be reiterated. Fathers are to be the leaders of their homes. The buck stops with them. And that sometimes could be hard to hear in a culture that is so egalitarian. But again, it's not about me, Tarzan, you, Jane, that kind of thing. It's not that at all. It's for this understanding of order and the fact that we didn't give ourselves that vocation. It comes from God. The other thing is we've talked about, and Eli is the poster child for this, we're not to be striving to simply be non-confrontational, a non-confrontational friend to our kids, because that leads to their destruction. That is not healthy. That is disordered. And so we're supposed to be helping create order, which then is flourishing for our children. The opposite is, could you imagine being raised in a home where your parents never bought any vegetables, never bought any kind of protein or anything, and all they gave you was gummy worms? You wouldn't be alive very long. That junk food would kill them. Well, that's oftentimes the way we parent. Is we think, oh, I just need to give them what they want. Well, what they want is not what they need. So
I remember what I was going to say, by the way.
Go ahead.
I'd write it down. Fathers are to be leaders of their homes. I think, again, in the context of order, and especially in a marriage, and anyone who's married knows this, at the very beginning, you're like, this is going to be bliss, and it is. But at the very beginning, you're like, it's absolutely going to be happily ever after. But no matter how much you love your spouse, I can guarantee you at some point you're going to disagree. And what happens when you disagree and you can't come to terms? Someone's going to have to sacrifice and someone's going to have to take the lead, and not in an authoritarian way. But in our culture, what's the solution? If two people disagree, well, it's over.
Mm-hmm.
Just go your way. And what does that do for the kids?
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things I know Trish and I, even before we had children, we talked about it. And one of the things is that we were going to be on the same page. Now, that might be behind closed doors talking through things, but it was not as though we were going to allow kids to manipulate one parent. So it's like good cop, bad cop, Mom's always giving in, doting and everything, and dad's seen as the ogre. No, you need to be on the same page. And it doesn't mean you have to agree with every single thing, but you have to come to a consensus, especially so that your kids understand that there's continuity.
Yeah. And this is not always going to be the father always doing what he wants to do either.
Yeah, exactly.
He's called to sacrifice.
Yeah.
But in some instances, the buck does stop with him.
Yeah.
I would say it's like, are we going to go to church this Sunday? Yes. 100%. We're doing it. Well, what about this or that or all these other events? Well, sorry. Yeah. We're doing this.
Yeah. This is heavily towards fathers here, I know, and part of that's because of talking about order and what we just talked about. But probably one of the greatest things we can teach our kids is how we treat our spouse. I've told my girls, see how the dad treats the mom, and that's going to tell you what kind of relationship you're getting in. So I think part of it is the way we treat our spouse, the one that we are one flesh with, because that's the only person that we are with until death do us part. Kids eventually need to leave the nest. So we need to give them the tools to be able to do that. Well, part of that is husbands loving their wives in a way that is not thinking about self first or putting self first, but thinking about the needs and what is best for the home and especially for the wife. Yeah.
And there's that balance too, because it's husbands love your wives, wives respect your husbands. Not that wives aren't supposed to love their husbands or husbands aren't supposed to respect their wives, but both are called to a very high duty.
Yeah.
And so again, if the husband loves his wife, there are going to be times when he himself is going to sacrifice. But if the wife respects the husband, there are going to be times when he's like, I'm sorry, we have to do this. This is where we go, because there are going to be points where you're going to disagree.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then we talked about this before. We're going to get into this next time, how the domestic church relates to the parish and vice versa. I think one of the things we have to say is within the home, we need to teach priorities. And the priorities, we've talked about this before. We talked about this last time when we talked about remember the Sabbath day. The point is that one of the things we need to do is make it a priority that in this house, the church is absolutely vital to our understanding of who we are as a family. And so church becomes number one on the social calendar, number one on the family calendar, so that kids understand the priority of the worship of God that comes before all things. Yeah. All right. So in the Offices of Instruction on page 288, we read the following about the scope of the fifth commandment, which we're going to talk about next episode, but we'll give you, this is what we would call a teaser. Stu, would you read the fifth commandment in terms of the explanation that we have?
To love, honor, and help my father and mother, to honor and obey the civil authority, to submit myself to all my governors, teachers, spiritual pastors, and masters, and to order myself in that lowliness and reverence which becometh a servant of God.
So again, we see here in the fifth commandment, it's not only about our relationship between children and parents to their children, but also about other authorities. And that's what we're going to talk about next episode: governors, teachers, spiritual pastors, and masters. And we're going to explain what that is. The one thing we didn't talk about, which I'm going to touch on here, and feel free to jump in, and that is, I'm dealing with this right now, and that is end-of-life issues with our parents. This is not a guilt trip, and it's kind of like schooling. There are some people say homeschooling is the only biblical, allowed, and I don't believe that. Or you can't send your kids to a private school, or you can't even send them to a good public school or anything. I'm not saying any of that. Same thing with parenting, end-of-life issues. But I think whatever decisions we make for our parents, it goes back to that same principle. We can't be thinking about our comforts. We need to be thinking about how we can honor and serve and obey our parents. And so, for some, it might be, okay, we're not going to put mom or dad or mom and dad in a nursing home. But for others, it might be, I don't have the capability, especially if it's dad, I don't have the capability to be able to lift and change or whatever. I understand. It's not like there's one answer for that. But I think the principle is this: we need to not see our parents as a nuisance or as somebody that we just don't want to deal with. We need to respect and honor our parents, because when we were in diapers and had to be changed and had to be fed and had to be cared for, they were there to do that. And when they get to a point in life where they need that, we need to be willing to step up to the plate and do that.
That was actually kind of in the back of my mind. And if I may, you're not saying this, but I do think you, Father, are a good example of that. You have been very dutiful to your parents. And I think you can be like Paul in this respect and say, follow my example. It's been very inspiring to watch. But throughout all this, we've been talking, and I think one thing that we kind of missed, we talked about how a man shall leave his father and mother. And the reasons for that is you do have to kind of focus on your family. But as you get older, and especially in this day and age, when people are living longer and everything, that also doesn't mean your parents cease to be your parents.
Yeah.
You still have to honor your parents, and you still should take care of them. And the honoring, that can change over time, especially when the roles kind of reverse and you become more of the parent now, and your parent almost becomes a child because of different issues, just thinking and health and all that. But you still want to be respectful and mindful of that.
Yeah, yeah. And especially in our day where it's kind of like nothing should get in the way of my happiness. It's what you talked about before, Father, this idea, especially in our country, where we want our independence and we want our freedom and we want all these things, and it's individual rights and all that. I'm not knocking any of that, but I'm saying all that needs to be put in proper perspective. And we are called to love our neighbor, and that begins in the home. It begins with our spouse, but it also, when we leave our father and mother, we don't abandon them, and we are to be there when they need us.
All right. That is it for this episode. If you have any questions or any comments, please email us at podcast@stphillipsblacksburg.org or podcast@anglicanprovince.org, and we will answer your questions. Thanks so much. Have a great day.